I'm going to talk about a new paper which is not corporate finance and which has a significant empirical dimension. Okay, and the last caveat, as yesterday when Vincent made the opening remarks, he made it very clear that all papers in the conference had been selected through a very strict peer review process, except the invited talks. So I hope you will like it anyway. So it's joint. This is joint work with so Bruno, whom you have identified quite well by now, Christophe Bizière, who is also here, who is my colleague at TSE, Mathieu Bouvard from McGill, and Albert Mengveld from Amsterdam. Okay, so yeah, so what is okay? Why did we start working on the pricing of Bitcoin? So usually, if you want to to buy goods and services, you will use your national currency. You will use standard money that is created by a central bank, so cash, or by commercial banks. And in general, everything goes well, but sometimes no. It can be that these institutions are not totally trustworthy. It may be that you face some inflation. You might be expropriated, or maybe the bank could collapse. I mean, think of what happens in some countries, in Venezuela or in Zimbabwe. And one, maybe not the only one, but one motive behind the invention of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin was to provide an alternative means of payment. As Nakamoto writes it, Bitcoin allows online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. And what we want to explore is this dimension. Can it work? Can we have this, do people consider these cryptocurrencies as alternative means of payments, or is it just like, a fad or a bubble about to burst? Now, as Delaya mentioned it earlier today, maybe this audience is full of cryptocurrency enthusiasts, but believe me, in the outside world, this is not totally the case. And we've seen a lot of warnings by prominent economists. I don't have I don't have quotes from computer scientists. I should have that. Last November, the director of the Bank of International Settlements, wrote, for payments where buyer and seller never meet, trust is vital. So a decentralized network cannot replace tried and tested institutions. And now, an even more prominent, at least to me, economist, so my boss, Jean Tirole, wrote, Bitcoin is a pure bubble. Its price will fall to zero if trust vanishes. Okay, but
the day after it started falling.
Actually, the difference between Jean and Carsten is that after Jean spoke, price went down. Yeah. After Carsten spoke, prices went up.
So let me remind me to put Jean's quote in our events in the empirical part of the paper. We don't have him, actually. But still, okay, with its ups and downs, if you look at the history of Bitcoin, it was valued almost zero in 2010. And now, last week at least, I didn't check today. Each time I present this paper, I should check in the morning whether Bitcoin still exists. I'm sorry. Did you do that? Last week it was still around $5,300, but you see that, okay, with some ups and downs towards the end of the period, the Bitcoin still exists. And there are some transactions going on. So for the moment, these are only data that are publicly available on blockchain.info, but we'll use other data later. And the question is, okay, are these prices the result of some irrational behavior, or are people irrational when they do these transactions? And again, some prominent voices seem to think it is the case. Okay, Alan Greenspan, you cannot tell me that you can create out of nothing something which has a medium of exchange value. It's not a rational currency in that sense. And our ambition is to say, okay, let's frame all this in a rational setting. So let's build a rational expectation equilibrium. That's the REE model of Bitcoin. Yes?
But isn't that what the central banks do? They turn on the printing press, and there's value out of nothing.
You're right.
Magic.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly the, yeah. But he seems to think that they are more trustworthy.
Okay, so it's a mockery.
That's the, and what we want to do is to have the most, I would say, standard or canonical model, rational expectation equilibrium model that we can confront to the data. And I think the main contribution of this paper is really in the confrontation of this model to the data. And so to build our model, we start from really the basic question in economics: what is money? What is money? Among other stuff, it's a way to solve what we call the non-double coincidence of wants problem. So a crash course in monetary economics. What is it? Super simple. Suppose I have apples, but I want chocolate. And then I meet Jason. Jason has chocolate, and he likes apples. And then we're fine, because we're going to exchange our apples and our chocolate, and we'll be super happy. But now imagine that Jason, he wants apples, but he has coffee. I don't want coffee. I want chocolate. So I could accept his coffee, but really, I don't like it so much. And what I'm going to do, I would need to find someone else who has coffee against chocolate. It's going to be a mess. In that case, money is a way for us to make an exchange. Is a way for Jason to buy my apples. And I will accept money because I will think that later on, other people will accept it to sell me chocolate. And we will build a model that uses this insight, which is extremely standard in monetary economics. And Linda presented one model in which you had, at every period, the green and the red agents who have this non-double coincidence of wants problem. We use a slightly different setting, which is the simplest you can think of to model this idea of non-double coincidence of wants. We will use an overlapping generation model. So overlapping generation model means at each period, you have two generations of people. You have young people and old people. The young people, they have apples, and they would like to save some for when they are old. But the only people they meet are the old ones. And the old ones, they're happy to take the apples. But they will not be there next period to give them back, because they will not be there, precisely. And so this is where money will be useful. Because the young and old will be able to exchange apples with money. And the next period, the young will use the money, who have become old, will use the money to buy the apples, okay? So I should say at this stage that please feel free to interrupt at any time. In economics, we are used to that. I mean, you saw Bruno interrupting everyone all the time. And if there is something that is not clear, please raise your hand and I will be happy to answer. Okay. Was there a hand? No. I'm sure you know a bit all this. Should say it's a mix of both. I mean, you will need to, your goods are perishable, you will need to transfer them tomorrow and to, yeah, okay, you could describe it with the two interpretations. So we'll have this very standard overlapping generation model with two currencies that will be really in line with the type of model that you had with Neil Wallace. So we'll be in this line of in this family of models. We'll try to incorporate in this model some what we think are distinguishing features of cryptocurrencies. And those will be transactional costs and benefits, a little bit like what Linda Schilling mentioned for the transactional costs part. And that will give us an equilibrium pricing equation for Bitcoin. And that will reflect these transactional costs and benefits of cryptocurrencies. And this is what we will define as the fundamental value of a cryptocurrency. And so far, apart from our specifications, which will be particular to our model, it's going to be a pretty standard model. And then we will collect data on Bitcoin and try to be as careful as we can to collect data that can be good proxies for the variables of our model. Okay, and that will be probably the most original part of the, I don't know what my co-authors think, but to me, this is probably the most original contribution of the paper. And we'll use this data to test our rational expectation equilibrium pricing relation and to try to give some estimate of what could be the fundamental value of Bitcoin attributed by people given the dynamics of prices that we have seen in the last 10 years. Okay? So that's the roadmap of the talk. Before that, I would like to mention the literature, although I should say that by now you should be aware of a lot of it. Well, because at least some papers, because they've been presented yesterday or today. Before describing them, just look at the dates. So for computer science, it might be usual to have only very recent dates, but for economics, this is not usual at all. And it means that there has been in the last year, or in the last year and a half, a lot of papers on this question and not many before that, in fact. So it's really a growing literature in economics. So you have some papers that try to endogenize the value of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or the price of Bitcoin by relying on this idea that it gives access to a network. Okay, and for instance, yesterday, William Kong presented a very nice piece built on this idea. And there are a couple of papers on that. And these are mostly theoretical, although there is some, at the end, some illustration with data. The objective is mostly to build these models. Then you have some purely empirical papers. So some of them look at, what happens to what Bitcoin prices look like. So there are papers which says, okay, it's super dispersed. It's a fragmented market, and there's no one. There isn't a single price for Bitcoin at every date. Then you have some empirical studies on, the dynamics of Bitcoin, whether it correlates with other macroeconomic variables, whether it changes with some news when Jean Tirole talks or when Agustin Karsten talks. The Auer and Claessens paper is about that, whether the price reacts to when prominent people talk about Bitcoin. Julien has a paper on how miners react to these changes in prices. And then there is a series of papers which is, I would say, more closely related to our work. And these papers, by and large, they try to model competition between cryptocurrencies and fiat currencies. And so Rodney, Garat, and Wallace have a paper, Bitcoin 1, 2, 3, and we'll share a lot with their framework. Linda has presented her paper, which has also a lot of common features with ours. Thorsten has presented a paper that also studies the pricing of cryptocurrencies. Okay, so we are in this line of literature. Okay, so the model. So So in the model, we have the really important agents are the investors. These are the people who live for 2 periods. So if an investor is born at day t, he lives until t+1, and he will receive some stochastic endowments when young, so apples, when young and old. And young investors have to make decisions on what to do with these endowments, with these apples. So they can consume them, or in part, or they can save them in order to consume them later, to consume later. So how can you save? Just to be more complete on the discussion we had earlier, they can buy a risk-free asset, so that delivers a fixed number of apples next period, and that is in 0 net supply. Or they have access to 2 types of currencies. So one is a central bank currency, dollar or euro, whatever. And the other one is a cryptocurrency. And you will see on the next slide the difference between the two. And then when these investors get old, what they do is only consuming. So they consume all they have. They can sell all their holdings of central bank currencies, cryptocurrencies, or risk-free assets, but in equilibrium they won't have any. And then we have 2 other types of agents who don't do much, I should say. They could do a little bit more without changing our equilibrium equation, but for simplicity for the moment they don't do much. We have the miners. So the miners in our setting, the only thing that they do is to get some transaction fees and to get as rewards the increase in the supply of Bitcoin. So at every period, the supply of Bitcoin increases. It's given as rewards. It's the coin-based transactions for miners. And once they get them, they consume them. Okay. And then we'll have other agents whom we called hackers. And the idea is that when you buy Bitcoins, maybe some of them will be stolen before you will be able to sell them again next period. And they are stolen by hackers. So hackers, they are born at day t, and then at day t+1, they receive a fraction that we don't specify. It's a random variable, but we don't say anything about it. They receive a fraction of the cryptocurrency supply that was there the period before, and then they sell also and they consume, okay? And at each date, you have a supply of the central bank currency and the cryptocurrency. And as I said, the risk-free asset is in 0 net supply. So if one wants to buy the asset, another agent has to sell it. Okay, yes?
What is the difference of your equilibrium model of cryptocurrency and another foreign exchange currency?
Another
Another fiat currency.
Okay, this is here. You will see it's very little. The differences are the following. So, suppose I'm a young investor. Okay, I can consume now, and then I will also consume tomorrow. What I want to do is to maximize my expected utility from consumption. For that, I will decide to buy some cryptocurrencies and some central bank currencies. What's the difference for me to buy one or the other? Well, when I buy, when young, some cryptocurrencies, so suppose that I buy a quantity QT of cryptocurrency, and suppose that my cryptocurrency has a price PT, so a number of apples. So if I want to buy 1 unit, I have to spend PT apples, okay? When I do that, on top of the price of the cryptocurrency, I will incur some extra cost. And this extra cost in so CYT is the consumption of a young investor. It's the last term, phi t of QT times PT. It's a transaction cost that I pay when I want to buy some cryptocurrencies in order to consume next period. And I don't have this transaction cost if I decide to buy a central bank currency. So that's the first difference, this transaction cost. But of course, when I'm young, I can also buy some central bank currencies, and the quantity that I buy is Q hat T, and the price of this central bank currency is P hat T, and I can also invest in the risk-free asset, and it's ST. Now the second difference, when I am old, what happens? My consumption depends on 1, 2, 3, 4 things. First, I have some endowments, I receive some apples. I might have some goods from my risk-free assets. And then I'm going to consume by selling the cryptocurrencies that I've bought. So how much will I consume? Maybe part of my cryptocurrencies will be hacked. So if I buy QT units, maybe at the next period I will have only a fraction 1 minus H times QT. So that's a second, if you want, specific aspect of cryptocurrencies. So I have only a fraction 1 minus H T plus 1 of my cryptocurrency. And the other assumption is that if I buy goods with cryptocurrency, I enjoy some additional transactional benefit. It is not endogenized in our model, it's taken as granted. It's this theta T plus 1. So if I'm buying goods, if I'm selling Bitcoins, I get some additional apples, if you want. And that's the third difference between a cryptocurrency in our model and a central bank currency. Now, you could tell me that there are other currencies which could have specific transaction costs. So, for instance, Linda has transaction costs for the two currencies, or that could have specific transactional benefits. That's right. But why do we do that? Because then we will collect data to proxy for these transactional benefits and transactional costs. And that's how we'll be able to bring the model to the data. Yes?
I just wonder if the central bank currencies, they are protected by law, but not the cryptocurrencies. So is it any possibilities that the young might instead just create their own new cryptocurrency and wipe out the old one?
So I didn't hear the end of your question, but regarding the first part, there are some aspects of central bank currencies that exist in practice that we do not model. The only thing that we assume, because it will help us derive our equilibrium, our return equation, is that the price of the central bank currency doesn't go to zero. You can think of it as being the result of an intervention of the central bank. But that's the only aspect, and it's only because we divide everything by the price of the central bank currency. So we don't want it to be to zero. But that's the only thing that will... So the only differences between our two currencies are transactional costs and benefits for, and the risk of hack for cryptocurrencies, and the fact that our central bank currency has a price that doesn't go to zero. Yes, Linda? Exactly, or the risk-free rate directly pins out the inflation rate. Yes, you're absolutely right. That's what's going to happen. Okay, so you see, super standard, except that we have this cost, phi, risk of hack, H, and theta, transactional benefit. And again, how will we, why did we introduce these elements? Well, the transactional benefits, you know, it might be that you prefer to make transactions in cryptocurrencies than in central bank currencies, simply because you prefer that. Or it can be that, you know, you can purchase an enhanced good, so that's, you prefer to use these currencies. Or maybe you will not be expropriated or taxed or anything. But in the model, it's not endogenized. So, but think of these potential benefits as illustrating our theta. And the cost, what is the cost of, so phi prime is the marginal cost of buying crypto? Well, if you have bought crypto, you should know it. It's both the cost of, you know, having a wallet, going through exchanges, etc.,